It began as a clear afternoon over the Atlantic Ocean. Calm skies, calm sea, nothing unusual. 5 U.S. Navy bombers lifted off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida on December 5, 1945. Routine training mission, perfect weather, no enemy in sight. But within 3 hours, every pilot was gone. No wreckage, no bodies, just radio static. The last voice transmission, desperate, broken, said, "We can't tell where we are. Everything looks strange. The ocean doesn't look right." After that, silence. Search planes were sent. One of them vanished too. Over 300 rescue crew scoured 250,000 square miles of ocean. They found nothing. The U.S. Navy's official report called it as if they had flown to Mars. What began as a simple training flight turned into one of the greatest mysteries in modern history. And it wasn't the first or the last time ships and planes disappeared in that same triangle of ocean. This is the untold story of Flight 19, the squadron that vanished into thin air, and the legend it created, the Bermuda Triangle. The mission was known as Navigation Problem Number 1, a standard training exercise. 5 Avenger torpedo bombers, carrying 14 men in total, led by Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor, an experienced flight instructor and decorated World War II veteran. The date was December 5, 1945, only months after the end of WWII. For the men, this was supposed to be a calm, almost boring flight, a final test before the holidays. At 2:10 p.m., the planes took off one by one, heading east toward the Bahamas. They were to practice bombing runs on a small island, turn north, then west, and return to base by sunset. Simple, precise, routine. But unknown to them, this was no ordinary flight. One by one, strange errors began to creep into their navigation. Compasses started spinning wildly, radio signals began to distort, and in the control tower, operators began to see something was wrong, terribly wrong. By 3:45 p.m., the first sign of distress came through. "This is an emergency. We seem to be off course. We can't find land. Repeat, we can't find land." What began as routine became the start of a nightmare. Lieutenant Taylor was no rookie. He had logged over 2,500 flight hours and had flown combat missions in the Pacific. But that day, even he seemed uncertain. At 4:00 p.m., his radio crackled through static. "Both my compasses are out. I'm trying to find Fort Lauderdale, but I'm not sure of my position." The control tower instructed him to fly west, toward the setting sun, that would bring him back to Florida. But Taylor disagreed. He was convinced he was flying over the Florida Keys, meaning he thought he needed to head northeast instead. It was a fatal error. In reality, Flight 19 was already far out to sea, east of the Bahamas, flying deeper into the Atlantic. Every mile they traveled took them further from safety, and the sun was sinking. By 5:00 p.m., daylight was fading, clouds were rolling in, and the ocean below had turned dark and featureless. The pilots could no longer tell where sky ended and sea began. By nightfall, radio operators were in chaos. Multiple stations were trying to reach Flight 19. Some heard faint, broken signals. Others heard nothing but static. At 6:20 p.m., one pilot's voice came through clearly for the last time. "We can't tell where we are. Everything looks strange. The ocean doesn't look right." That chilling sentence has echoed through history. A clue, a mystery, a riddle. Moments later, another transmission. "We're not sure of our position. We think we must be about 225 miles northeast of base." Then, silence. Radio logs show one last desperate message, possibly Taylor's voice, saying, "All planes, close up tight. We'll have to ditch unless landfall." That was the final message ever received from Flight 19. After that, nothing. 5 aircraft, 14 men, gone. Within hours, the Navy launched the largest search and rescue operation in peacetime history. Over 300 aircraft, 21 ships, and thousands of men scoured the Atlantic for days. But they found nothing. Not one piece of debris, not one oil slick, not a single body. Even stranger, one of the rescue planes, a PBM Mariner with 13 men aboard, also disappeared mid-search. Witnesses on a nearby ship reported seeing a fireball in the sky, possibly an explosion, but no wreckage was ever recovered. Now, 27 men were missing in total. The official Navy report, released months later, offered no explanation. It simply concluded that the planes were lost at sea under unknown circumstances. But that phrase, unknown circumstances, became the seed of something much bigger. A myth, a legend, a mystery that refused to die. In the years that followed, stories about the disappearance of Flight 19 spread like wildfire. Newspapers dubbed it the Lost Squadron. Writers began to speculate, could something supernatural be happening in that stretch of ocean? That's when the phrase, the Bermuda Triangle, first entered popular culture. A region stretching roughly between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, an area where ships and planes supposedly vanished without a trace. Between 1945 and the early 1970s, dozens of other disappearances were linked to this triangle. Cargo ships, private yachts, military aircraft, all lost without distress calls. Some claimed the area was cursed. Others said magnetic anomalies or alien forces were at work. But for the families of Flight 19, it wasn't mythology. It was heartbreak. Wives, mothers, and children waited for answers that never came. Their loved ones didn't vanish into legend. They vanished into the sea and silence. In January 1946, a full Navy Board of Inquiry convened at Fort Lauderdale. The hangar was filled with reporters, officers, and grieving families. Maps of the Atlantic covered the walls. Every radio log, every Baron, every line of dialogue from that day was replayed again and again. The Navy wanted closure, but closure never came. The investigation uncovered contradictions. Taylor's compasses had malfunctioned, but why had all 5 planes drifted so far east? No storm, no sabotage, no enemy presence. Their radio frequencies had failed one after another, as if swallowed by the air itself. Mechanics swore the aircraft were in perfect condition. Meteorologists said the skies were clear. The only plausible theory left was human error, but even that didn't fit. Taylor had made mistakes, yes, but experienced pilots behind him had their own instruments, their own navigation charts, yet they followed him into oblivion. When the final report was issued, a single line stood out. Cause of disappearance, unknown. And with that, the legend was born. Months turned into years. Fishermen off the Florida coast spoke of strange metal shapes glinting below the waves. Navy divers investigated, only to find coral and shadows. No wreckage, no engines, no evidence that 5 massive aircraft had ever touched the ocean. In 1947, a pilot from the Bahamas radioed that he had spotted 5 faded white wings under shallow water. But when ships reached the coordinates, there was nothing. The ocean had erased its secrets again. For the families, time stood still. Each December 5th, they gathered at the base chapel in Fort Lauderdale to light candles for the missing. 14 flames for 14 men, their names read aloud against the sound of breaking waves. One mother was quoted in a local paper. They didn't crash, they were taken. To some, it sounded like grief. To others, it sounded like prophecy. In the early 1950s, a series of mysterious disappearances caught the public's imagination. Cargo ships vanished. Private planes never arrived. Journalists began connecting the dots, drawing a triangle on maps: Miami, Bermuda, Puerto Rico. Flight 19 was the cornerstone. Every book, every article returned to that single December afternoon in 1945, and as stories multiplied, facts began to blur with fiction. By 1964, writer Vincent Gaddis coined the phrase, the Bermuda Triangle. His article described an area of strange forces and vanished vessels. It captured the world's attention. Soon came documentaries, radio dramas, and television specials. The triangle became a symbol of fear, of mystery, of man's helplessness before nature. But beneath the myth, real questions remained. How could 5 aircraft vanish so completely in daylight, leaving not even an oil slick? How could the Navy's search planes, equipped with radar, find nothing? And why did the records of weather conditions, flight transcripts, and certain radio logs disappear from archives in the years that followed? By the 1970s, technology had improved. Sonar mapping, magnetometers, and underwater photography promised new answers. Marine archaeologists and Navy teams returned to the area where Flight 19 was last recorded. They found hundreds of wrecks, World War II training planes, cargo ships, and even sunken submarines. But none matched the serial numbers or engine patterns of the lost Avengers. Oceanographers began studying magnetic anomalies in the region. They discovered pockets of magnetic variation, areas where compasses could deviate by several degrees, enough to confuse even skilled navigators. Others proposed methane hydrates, gas trapped under the seabed that could erupt and reduce water density, causing ships to sink suddenly and planes to lose lift. The theory made scientific sense, but there was no direct evidence it had ever happened where Flight 19 disappeared. Each discovery only deepened the mystery. For every theory proven, 2 new questions emerged. Behind the legends and data were men, real men with names, faces, families. Lieutenant Charles Taylor, the commander, had survived combat over the Pacific. He was considered steady, disciplined, brave. Yet in his final hours, his radio voice was filled with confusion and fear. His students, George Devlin, Robert Gerber, Joseph Bossi, and others, were barely in their 20s. Some had never flown over open ocean before. They trusted their instructor, their training, their instruments, until everything failed at once. Letters recovered from their lockers spoke of Christmas plans, weddings, newborns they hadn't met. One wrote to his mother, "After this flight, I'll be done. I can't wait to be home." Those letters were delivered, but without the men who wrote them. In the official Navy archives, Flight 19's case file closes with a single stamped phrase, "Presumed lost." But to those who studied the case, presumed was not enough. As the 1950s rolled into the 60s, aviation technology advanced. Jet engines, radar systems, and satellite mapping were transforming the world. Yet Flight 19 remained an open wound in naval history. Pilots flying over the same region began reporting strange phenomena. Their compasses spun wildly for brief moments. Static would suddenly fill their radios. Some claimed to see glowing orbs beneath the water's surface, like submerged suns, one pilot wrote. In 1956, a commercial DC-3 flying from San Juan to Miami disappeared mid-flight with 32 people aboard. No distress call, no debris. The coordinates? Within the very same stretch of ocean. It was as if the sky itself remembered what had been taken, and every few years, it demanded another offering. One air traffic controller from Miami International, haunted for decades, confessed in a 1978 interview, "Every time I saw a blip fade on the radar without reason, I thought of them. Flight 19, it never left me." By the late 1960s, science had failed to give a satisfying answer, and wherever science stopped, mystery stepped in. Authors, psychics, and paranorms. Researchers began proposing explanations that reached beyond Earth itself. Some claimed Flight 19 had flown through a time vortex, a rift in space-time that transported them to another dimension. Others said the squadron had been abducted by extraterrestrials, drawn toward a glowing object seen in the sky that night. In 1977, Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind immortalized that idea, showing the missing Avengers landing decades later, untouched by time. Hollywood turned tragedy into wonder, and millions believed. Still, a chilling pattern lingered beneath the fantasy. Every major theory, from aliens to time portals, was born out of one undeniable truth. 5 aircraft vanished without a trace, and not one piece of definitive evidence has ever surfaced. And when human understanding fails, imagination fills the void. Not everyone believed in cosmic explanations. By the 1980s, scientists and skeptics pushed back hard. Larry Cush, a librarian and pilot, published The Bermuda Triangle Mystery, Solved, an explosive work that challenged decades of myths. He revealed inconsistencies in reports, exaggerated distances, falsified coordinates, and even duplicated stories. According to Cushi, Flight 19's fate wasn't supernatural at all. It was human error, worsened by compass failure and fuel exhaustion. He pointed out that the Navy's search and rescue aircraft, the PBM Mariner, that vanished the same night, likely exploded mid-air due to a known fuel leak issue. His conclusion was harsh but grounded. The only real mystery of the Bermuda Triangle is why so many people prefer the myth to the truth. But the more skeptics tried to bury the legend, the more it grew. Mystery cells, and Flight 19 had become the ultimate unsolved story. In 1986, treasure hunters scanning the seafloor off Fort Lauderdale found what they believed were the remains of Flight 19. 5 Avenger bombers, all together, resting silently on the sand. News spread like wildfire. For a brief moment, it seemed the ghosts could finally rest, but when the aircraft serial numbers were analyzed, the truth was devastating. They belonged to a different training squadron entirely, another group of Avengers that had crashed decades later during routine exercises. The discovery reignited hope, but also despair. If those wrecks were found, where were the real ones? How could 5 aircraft, nearly 20 tons each, vanish so completely? The Atlantic had swallowed not only the men, but the very evidence of their existence. Even sonar teams in the 2000s, armed with state-of-the-art equipment, found no trace, no engines, no fuselage, no remains. It was as though Flight 19 had never existed at all. The ocean has a memory, but not the kind humans understand. It holds wrecks, whispers, echoes, and sometimes it keeps secrets forever. In 1991, a deep-sea expedition mapped an area once believed to be near Flight 19's last transmission. At 1,500 feet below, they found something unexpected, an unnatural depression in the seabed, shaped like an enormous spiral. Oceanographers said it could be natural sediment currents, but among the crew, silent glances said otherwise. One diver, interviewed later, described the feeling of descending into the void. It wasn't fear, it was presence, like something was watching, like the ocean knew. Every sonar ping came back distorted. Equipment malfunctioned, not once, but repeatedly. When they surfaced, half their recordings were unreadable, erased by static. Officially, nothing was found. Unofficially, the team never returned. As one researcher later said quietly, maybe the ocean doesn't want to give them back. For every man who vanished that December evening in 1945, there was someone waiting, a wife, a child, a mother who refused to believe the telegram. One woman, the wife of Ensign George Peonessa, kept a lamp burning in her window for 20 years. Every night she'd whisper a single prayer, guide him home. Letters were written, petitions filed, and one by one, the families faded into quiet grief. But even in silence, they kept searching. In the 1960s, a few relatives joined amateur expeditions, convinced they could bring back what the Navy couldn't. They'd sail over the coordinates, drop flowers into the sea, and watch as the petals vanished in seconds, sucked beneath the waves as if swallowed by something unseen. Some of them said it felt like the ocean was answering, not cruelly, but protectively, as if it was keeping its promise. They are safe, just not here. By the late 20th century, Flight 19 had become the beating heart of a larger mystery, the so-called Bermuda Triangle. Ship after ship, plane after plane. Sometimes, even entire crews disappeared without radio distress calls. In 54, the Star Ariel, 20 passengers, gone between Bermuda and Jamaica. 63, the Marine Sulphur Queen, 39 men aboard a tanker ship, vanished without trace. 1972, A cargo vessel named Anita, 32 crew members lost, only oil slicks remained. Each story had its own details, but they all shared one shadow: no wreckage, no survivors, and no clear explanation. Scientists blamed methane gas eruptions, rogue waves, violent storms, or human miscalculation. But when dozens of ships and planes vanished from the same invisible triangle, patterns started to feel intentional. The ocean didn't just take, it selected. And at the center of every theory, every obsession, stood Flight 19, the story that started it all. In the early 2000s, new technology reignited the hunt. Advanced sonar, deep diving drones, and satellite imaging gave hope to historians and explorers who believed modern science could finally close the case. In 2009, a private research group launched Project Nemo, a multi-million-dollar mission to locate any trace of Flight 19 between the Florida coast and the Bahamas. They scanned over 100,000 square kilometers of seabed. They found hundreds of wrecks, but none matched. Each aircraft was cataloged, studied, ruled out. Yet something unexpected happened. Electronic instruments repeatedly failed when operating over a specific trench northeast of Bimini. Batteries drained instantly. Drones malfunctioned mid-dive. All data from that section came back corrupted, filled with blank frames and flickering noise. The ocean, it seemed, still guarded its secret. One of the lead scientists later admitted quietly in an interview, "It's like we were close, too close." Then everything went dark. Flight 19's story isn't only about disappearance. It's about what humanity cannot accept. The unknown, the Navy, the families, the conspiracy theorists, all of them needed closure. Because humans aren't built for mysteries that never end. The Bermuda Triangle became a cultural ghost story, appearing in books, songs, and documentaries. Even scientists who mocked the myth admitted privately that some of the data defied logic. Psychologists say that mysteries like Flight 19 serve a strange purpose. They remind societies that not everything can be explained. That no matter how advanced we become, there are still forces that laugh at our instruments and equations. Aviation historian Daniel Webster once said, "Flight 19 was the last gasp of human arrogance, the belief that the world was fully mapped." That night, the ocean proved us wrong. And maybe that's why the story still haunts us. Not because it's unsolved, but because it shows how fragile our certainty really is. As dawn breaks over the Atlantic, the waves shimmer gold, endless, eternal, indifferent. Below them lies a graveyard unseen, stretching for miles in every direction. Flight 19's men are still there, perhaps scattered across the seabed, perhaps resting in another world entirely, wherever lost things go when the earth swallows them whole. But their legacy endures. Their voices recorded in that final transmission. We can't tell where we are. Everything looks wrong. Still echo through every flight, every voyage that crosses the mysterious waters of the Triangle. And sometimes pilots swear they hear whispers in the radio static. Faint, distorted, but human. A transmission frozen in time. A call that never stopped echoing. This is FT-28. We can't find land. We can't find the sun. The ocean answers with silence. The only constant in this story. No wrecks, no bodies, no ending. Years passed, but sonar operators stationed along the Atlantic coast began to notice something strange. Every few months, deep under the Bermuda waters, their instruments picked up faint rhythmic pulses, metallic, regular, almost like propeller beats. Some dismissed it as oceanic noise, tectonic vibrations, or machinery from distant submarines. But the timing was uncanny. December, every few years, the same frequency pattern. A retired Navy sonar specialist once told a journalist, it sounded like a squadron flying, but underwater, like ghosts still moving in formation. Scientists later confirmed the data had anomalies, echoes that didn't align with known vessels. They called it resonance interference. But for the families of Flight 19, it was a sign. The ocean was still speaking, in code. By the 1960s and 70s, Flight 19 had transcended from a military mystery into a mythic legend. Books were written, films produced, and radio shows reenacted the haunting transmissions of the lost pilots. In 1977, Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind even portrayed Flight 19's Avengers being discovered, returned intact, decades later, in the desert. It wasn't just entertainment. It was obsession. Conspiracy theorists claimed alien abductions. Others pointed to secret Nazi experiments or dimensional rifts left from wartime weapon testing. But in the noise of pop culture, the real tragedy, 5 young crews, lost to time, began to fade. History became fiction, and fiction became truth. And the line separating them grew as blurry as the Atlantic fog. In 1983, a classified U.S. naval survey known as Operation Magellan secretly revisited the Bermuda Triangle's most notorious coordinates. Publicly, the mission was for ocean mapping. Privately, it sought closure on long-missing wartime aircraft. For 3 months, sonar teams scanned trenches thousands of feet deep. They recovered minor wreckage fragments, twisted aluminum, faded serial plates, corroded gauges. At first, analysts believed they'd found one of Flight 19's Avengers, but the serial numbers didn't match. Instead, the wreck belonged to another training flight, lost in the same area, just 3 years later. One officer wrote in his field log, "It's as if this place collects the same kind of tragedies over and over, like history caught in a loop." Operation Magellan's final report remains sealed. Officially, they found nothing. Unofficially, whispers persist that they found something that couldn't be explained. In 1997, 2 experienced divers, brothers from Key West, embarked on a private expedition using their own equipment. They never returned, but a waterproof camera recovered months later revealed what they saw. Among hundreds of blurred underwater photos, one image stood out. A rusted aircraft fuselage half buried in sand, its tail number almost legible, FT-28. Experts later dismissed the photo as a misread, the resolution too low, the light being too poor. But conspiracy circles called it proof. If true, it meant Flight 19 wasn't scattered. It was sleeping, whole, somewhere deep beneath the Bermuda crust. A graveyard sealed in salt and time. In the early 2000s, a naval historian and psychologist named Dr. Eleanor Drake proposed a radical theory. She suggested that Flight 19's disappearance wasn't purely physical, but psychological. According to Drake, navigational disorientation, exhaustion, and collective panic could lead multiple pilots into shared hallucination, a phenomenon known as folie à plusieurs, madness shared by many. She argued they didn't vanish into another dimension. They simply flew further than they realized, losing orientation until fuel ran out. Her theory was logical, plausible, but emotionally empty. Because deep down, people didn't want rational answers. They wanted mystery. They needed the unknown to stay unknown, a reminder of awe in an age obsessed with certainty. In 2014, a team of oceanographers from Lisbon made an unexpected find during a geological mapping mission. They discovered an unexplored trench, a serpentine crack stretching hundreds of miles, reaching depths of over 20,000 feet. Inside that trench, sonar detected metallic anomalies, 5 objects aligned like a formation. Satellite data was sent to the U.S. Navy for verification. Within weeks, the information was classified, and the Portuguese research vessel's logs were confiscated. No further reports were ever released, but one crew member, speaking under anonymity, said, "They didn't look like natural formations. They looked arranged." It was the first potential scientific evidence that Flight 19, or its echoes, might still exist, preserved in darkness. In 2018, a group of amateur radio enthusiasts in Florida picked up a strange transmission on an old military frequency. It repeated only once every 2 minutes, a garbled voice, static-filled, barely audible. When filtered through spectrographic software, the message became clear. FT-28, fuel low, cannot find land. Same call sign, same words, but the frequency used had been inactive since the 1940s. Audio experts called it a hoax. Skeptics said it was a rebroadcast of old Navy archives bleeding through shortwave channels. Yet the enthusiasts insisted. They heard it live, in real time. It was as if Flight 19's final call had somehow slipped through the folds of history, echoing 70 years later across invisible waves. In 2021, declassified Navy documents revealed an unreported memo written 2 days after the disappearance. It stated that radar had briefly detected multiple returns east of Florida, objects moving in synchronized patterns at impossible speeds for 1945 technology. The memo was signed by a junior officer, Lieutenant Commander Frank Doherty, who later vanished from records entirely. His family claimed he died in a non-service accident. No body was found. His handwritten note attached to the memo read simply, "They were not alone up there." Whether he meant enemy aircraft, secret testing, or something else, no one knows. But the fact that it was buried for 75 years only deepened the question, what was the Navy trying to hide? Today, the U.S. Navy still lists Flight 19 as missing, presumed lost. Every December, a small memorial service takes place at Naval Air Station, Fort Lauderdale. Pilots, veterans, and descendants of the crew gather beneath the old control tower, now a museum. They light 5 lanterns, one for each Avenger. The names are read aloud: Taylor, Powers, Bossy, Gerber, and Hines. And as each name echoes across the tarmac, it feels as though time stands still. No one mentions aliens or triangles, just bravery, loss, and the unspoken bond between man and sea. Because whatever happened that night, one truth remains. They flew into history and became part of it. The ocean is calm now. The storms have passed. But somewhere beneath those endless waves, the final chapter of Flight 19 still whispers. If you listen carefully, not with instruments, but with silence, you can almost hear them. Engines humming faintly in the deep, a compass spinning lazily, a voice fading in and out. FT-28. We can't find land. Then nothing. The static returns, swallowing the sound, the sea, and the memory. And so the mystery of Flight 19 doesn't end. It simply continues, endlessly looping between fact and legend, between the living and the lost, between what we know and what we still fear. As night fell over the Atlantic, the search for Flight 19 grew desperate. Flares lit the sky, ships combed the darkness, and radio operators leaned into static, straining for a voice that would never come. Then, another tragedy. One of the rescue planes, a PBM Mariner, radioed its position and then exploded mid-air. Witnesses from a nearby freighter saw fire stretch across the water like a burning wound. The Mariner carried 13 men. None returned. The rescuers had vanished while looking for the vanished. The Atlantic had claimed them all, without a trace of mercy or evidence. At dawn, the sea lay calm, eerily calm. No debris, no oil slick, no floating life vests. Just the endless blue horizon mocking the searchers. Over 300 aircraft and 21 ships scoured 200,000 square miles. They found nothing. The press labeled it the greatest mystery in naval aviation history. Families gathered at Fort Lauderdale, waiting for answers that never came. One mother reportedly whispered, "He's not dead, he's just out there." And perhaps that was the first time someone gave voice to what people would later call the Bermuda Triangle. The Navy launched an official inquiry, but the findings only deepened the confusion. Flight leader Lieutenant Charles Taylor was described as experienced but nervous. Records revealed that Taylor had gotten lost before, twice, over the same region. Compasses on all 5 planes had malfunctioned. Radio signals faded inexplicably. The pilots flew in perfect formation, yet collectively drifted off course as though guided by an unseen force. In the report's final summary, the Navy wrote, "Cause of disappearance, unknown," 2 words that echoed like a ghost through the halls of military history. Years passed, and with them came stories. Sailors reported hearing distant engine sounds on calm nights. Fishermen swore they'd seen 5 old warplanes flying in formation, low and silent, before fading into fog. In 1953, a Pan Am pilot crossing the same region reported radar blips, 5 objects moving in a perfect V. When ground control checked, nothing appeared on their end. He later said, "They were there 1 second, gone the next, like shadows on water. No proof, no wrecks, only whispers of a squadron that refused to die." By the 1960s, stories of missing planes, ships, and radio silence had accumulated like storm clouds. Then came a writer named Vincent Gaddis. In a 1964 article, he gave this region its now infamous name, the Bermuda Triangle. Soon after, Charles Berlitz published his book, The Bermuda Triangle, in 1974, turning Flight 19 into global legend. People didn't just see it as a disappearance anymore. They saw it as a gateway, a door between worlds, a place where time, logic, and science lose their way, just like Flight 19 did. In the decades that followed, explorers, divers, and oceanographers hunted for clues. Submarines scoured the seabed, sonar mapped the depths, satellites scanned from above. They found hundreds of wrecks, yet none matched the serial numbers of Flight 19. Each new discovery brought hope, only to be crushed by cold facts. One wreck in 1991 was thought to be the Squadron, until technicians scraped away coral and read the plates. Different aircraft, different men. The ocean kept its secret. Every attempt to uncover it only reminded humanity how vast and silent the sea truly is. Scientists began to step in, determined to reclaim the mystery from Maya, as they pointed to methane gas eruptions beneath the ocean floor, capable of sinking ships instantly. Others blamed magnetic anomalies, or rogue waves that could rise 100 feet without warning. But skeptics asked, why only here? Why this perfect triangle between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico? Why did even radio waves seem to die here, as though the air itself was haunted? Somewhere between reason and legend, Flight 19 waited. Neither myth nor fact, just absence. While scientists debated and the world turned the mystery into entertainment, families of the lost still grieved. They weren't searching for answers, only peace. Every December 5th, at the Naval Air Station Museum in Fort Lauderdale, a bell rings 5 times, one for each plane. Veterans bow their heads. The families stand together, some now third-generation descendants, and stare at a bronze plaque with 30 names carved into history. One line reads, "We do not forget the vanished," and they haven't, not for 80 years. Even today, new theories emerge. Quantum distortions, gravitational anomalies, time slips, alien abductions. But every hypothesis carries the same flaw: no evidence. What remains is emotion. Because for many, Flight 19 isn't just about 5 lost aircraft. It's about the limits of understanding, about humanity's fragile trust in the things we build, and how quickly nature can remind us who's in control. Perhaps the ocean doesn't need to answer. Perhaps the mystery is the answer. As the waves crash endlessly against the Florida coast, a voice seems to whisper through the wind, the echo of a forgotten call sign, fading into eternity. Flight 19, the vanishing squadron. 30 men swallowed by the horizon, leaving behind a riddle carved into time. Every theory, every search, every documentary has tried to close the case. But maybe that's not what this story is meant for. Because in the heart of the Bermuda Triangle, some stories aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be remembered.